Hi everyone. This is a follow-up to a video I made about planned obsolescence on my main channel. I wanted to say more about a very specific debate surrounding the lifespan of light bulbs that was started by a Technology Connections video. Now, I don't like it when I click on a video and the YouTuber says, hey, watch all my other videos before you watch this one. But in this case, you are arriving in the middle of a debate if you're new. So I would recommend checking out the Technology Connections video first and foremost, probably my video on planned obsolescence, and if you want even more, maybe the Some More News video for the full context. I'll still do my best to lay it all out here. Planned obsolescence is the tendency for companies to intentionally sabotage the function and lifespan of their products so that people consume more of them. This means more profit for the companies, but consumers are worse off, spending more on inferior products which are less sturdy. Plus, there's all the waste and environmental damage, as well as the deleterious psychological and social consequences that come from a disposable attitude towards the things we own, which I explained in my original video. Planned obsolescence comes in quite a few different forms, from intentionally creating manufacturing faults in the product to perceived obsolescence, where there are new car models or iPhones which are bought just because when they come out, they make the old ones look old, even though they work just fine. The latter is probably more common nowadays, but one historical example of intentional sabotage that everyone uses is the case of light bulbs and the Phoebus Cartel. The story goes that in the 1920s, when commercial light bulbs were quite new, a bunch of companies across the world conspired to form a cartel. As well as doing the normal monopoly stuff like restricting competition and raising prices, the Phoebus Cartel has been accused of deliberately shortening the lifespan of bulbs so that people would buy more of them. And the evidence is clear that the average lifespan of bulbs did decline by several hundred hours over this period, while sales increased and the companies seemed to benefit. In my video, I stated that this was a literal capitalist conspiracy. Most planned obsolescence is like other complex things in this world. Misaligned incentives, incompetence, a few bad actors, a specific political environment, and bad policy choices. In other words, there's usually no point in pointing the finger. Yet with light bulbs, it really seems like we can. I think the reason the Phoebus Cartel story is so popular as an entry point into planned obsolescence is that it seems like such a clear conspiracy. The vast majority of light bulb production in the world went through the cartel in the 1930s, and they enforced rigid standards, inspecting cartel members' factories and fining them if they deviated. They were overt about being a cartel, whereas modern cartels aren't really. The fact that they apparently use this power to reduce the lifespan of bulbs is such a neat narrative that it effectively communicates the simple idea that making money may not be what's best for consumers. Most people have probably heard the story of the light bulbs in one form or another. I heard it when we were learning about electricity in my physics lessons when I was 14. Family friends have brought it up as well. If I'm explaining planned obsolescence as an idea, light bulbs are often my first example. Enter Technology Connections. Their video was released in the summer of 2023, and it is an excellent deep dive into how these incandescent light bulbs, the ones produced by the cartel, actually work. As Technology Connections shows, there is a trade-off between the lifespan of the bulb and its brightness. This means that shortening the lifespan of the bulbs necessarily entails making the bulbs brighter, which may be beneficial to consumers. Contrary to common perceptions, it seems like the bulbs must have been too dull before the cartel, so although they did reduce the lifespan of the bulbs, the increase in brightness may have been good for consumers. TC does a number of in-depth demonstrations of this fact in his high-tech studio, which hammers the point home. There's no doubt that he is right about the technology, and the demonstrations are really good. My video was recorded in June 2023, and the TC video came out a month or so later. It took a while to edit my video for various uninteresting reasons, so when I saw the TC video, I added a short edit to draw attention to it and how it challenged one of my examples. Light bulb companies were found to have violated antitrust laws in 1949, which included stipulations about them shortening the lifespans of the bulbs. Hey everyone, Editing UE here. Since I recorded this in June, I've been alerted to a new video video by a channel called Technology Connections, which is quite a big channel. And this video disputes the idea that the Phoebus light bulb cartel reduced the lifespan of bulbs in order to make a profit. Some people didn't like this part, and others saw fit to correct my light bulb story and apparently stop watching before they'd even seen it. YouTube is unfortunately a place where people think they can judge a whole video by one perceived error without understanding it as a whole, or even watching it for long enough to see that it addresses your issue directly.
Alec, regarding that so-called silent propulsion system in the Hunt for Red October, I printed out a list of technical errors which I think you'd enjoy discussing.
If you've watched my whole video, you'll know that the explicit point of it, as in its actual final argument, is to be structured in such a way that it does not depend too much on one specific case of planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is a systemic critique of capitalism. Many critiques of capitalism just use a single case study like Sarah Z and the AI dating app Replica, which I directly critiqued in the video. Planned obsolescence is observed across a wide range of industries in its various forms. Even without light bulbs, you still have cars, phones, laptops, clothing, household utilities, printers, computer games, textbooks, a pretty big list, and there are definitely more. Technology Connections seems to agree with this broader point.
I definitely think that planned obsolescence has happened, and arguably is still happening today, and I wasn't just making wordplay back then. I am genuinely on the side of the right to repair movement, and giving something an artificial expiration date just to ensure you can sell more is pretty gross.
What he also agrees with is that the Phoebus cartel existed and was bad.
To be clear, I'm not forgetting that this was a literal oligopoly with documented collusion efforts that undoubtedly set prices artificially high and did all sorts of other slimy things too. I'm not here saying the cartel was some sort of wonderful organization.
So this is a minor point of disagreement. It's not about either planned obsolescence in general, nor is it that capitalists can sometimes conspire to do bad things and stymie technological development. It's that in this specific case, these specific capitalists conspire to do something specific, namely shorten the lifespan of light bulbs in order to make more money. It's not even that we're disputing that they shortened the lifespan of the bulbs deliberately either. That is a fact. The question is whether they shortened it beyond the point that it benefited consumers. This really isn't the hill I wanted to die on, as the example doesn't matter too much for the general case against planned obsolescence, which, as Technology Connections correctly points out, concerns things which cost consumers a lot more than light bulbs do. But I'm going to die on it anyway. Let's sum this up with a pointless diagram or two. I am, after all, an economist. Here we have the lifespan versus the brightness of a traditional bulb. As the line shows, there is a negative association between the two, something proven comprehensively by Technology Connections in their video. This is no longer in dispute. On the top left, we have the Centennial bulb in Fremont, California, famously burning for over a century but basically useless because it's so dim. The classic Phoebus cartel conspiracy paints the companies as reducing the lifespan of the bulbs unnecessarily without any gain in brightness, as shown by the dot at the bottom left, which is underneath the line. What Technology Connections shows is that this was not the case. What the cartel were actually doing was pushing the average light bulb down the curve to increase brightness, which necessarily resulted in shorter lifespans. In my edit, I noted that while Technology Connections was really good on the technology, shock, they were less strong on the economics. One thing I will say is that if you look at the antitrust ruling, United States versus General Electric 1949, then you will find that there's a bit of back and forth about this. The court seems to accept that there is this inverse relationship, but still holds that the cartel and General Electric themselves had enough market power that they could determine what the industry standard for the length of the light bulb could be. So I think it's a little bit up in the air in terms of the economics. That Technology Connections video is very focused on the engineering side of things, and again, it's really good. Go and watch it and, make up your own mind. Again, this was a point some people took issue with. I think the lesson there, other than that I should stop reading the comments, is that I have a very different idea of what it means to actually address the economics of an issue than most people do. Technology Connections is not an economist, and he doesn't try to be. Staying in your lane is a good thing. It wasn't an insult to say that his video doesn't engage with the economics enough. Mine doesn't engage with the technology that much either. Hopefully, we could even learn from each other. Let's turn to exactly what I mean when I say engaging with the economics. To be honest, one of my least favourite moments of the Technology Connections video is when he makes a big deal out of the fact that reading the Wikipedia entry on the Phoebus cartel would inform you about the controversy.
What I think really bothers me is that you don't have to look that deeply to uncover this context. Just looking up the cartel on Wikipedia reveals that some engineers deemed 1,000 hours a reasonable figure to balance the various operational aspects of an incandescent bulb, since longer lifespan means reduced efficacy, lumens per watt. A longer life bulb of a given wattage puts out less light and therefore proportionally more heat than a shorter life bulb of the same wattage. Nevertheless, long-life incandescent bulbs were and are available with lifespan ratings up to 2,500 hours, and these do in fact produce less light per watt. There is even an excerpt from a report from the Monopolies and Restrictive Practices Commission of the United Kingdom from 1951, which says, quite plainly, that while it might look like hanky-panky was going on, conflicting factors make it impossible to view the great light bulb life shortening as anything nefarious.
I'm not here to say Wikipedia is dumb. I'm not a smart-ass 18-year-old undergraduate. I like Wikipedia. It's fine. It's just that when I checked this Wikipedia article, it was short and, to be frank, pretty weak. TC is fair to say you only need to check Wikipedia to see that there is a controversy, and I did this, but I wasn't convinced, because the entry was one-sided and missing citations, so I didn't use it as a source. The main citation in the excerpt TC is pointing to is a 1951 UK report which argues that many regard the Phoebus cartel's story as one of planned obsolescence, but because of the trade-off between the brightness and the length of life of a bulb, their target of 1,000 hours of life was actually reasonable. Yet the Wikipedia article failed to mention that the same report considers the Electric Light Manufacturers Association to have an arbitrary attitude towards this, and that the association said they do not see consumers as best placed to judge their own interests. Thanks to Cody Johnston for first highlighting that point, by the way, in the aforementioned Some More News video. In any case, the section of this report which deals with the lifespan of the bulbs is only a few paragraphs long and is hardly satisfactory. It's not up to the standard generally set by Technology Connections. Since we had our seemingly coincidental Summer of Planned Obsolescence controversy on YouTube, the Wikipedia page has itself been updated to reflect the messy reality. This is why Wikipedia is actually a very good website, maybe the only good website left, as Rebecca Long has argued. Relevant additions to the Wikipedia article include both internal comments from cartel executives and later findings by a US court suggest that the direct motive of the cartel in decreasing bulb lifespan was to increase profits by forcing customers to buy bulbs more frequently. And, while acknowledging that it should be borne in mind that the life of a lamp is inextricably related to the power of its light, it nonetheless found that because of General Electric's dominant industry position and lack of competition, it had the power to determine bulb lifespan across the entire industry, and that General Electric's main consideration in setting the lifespan of bulbs was profit. This is what the Technology Connections video was missing. The US Antitrust case of 1949 is worth going into in detail to see that there was in fact a clear and thorough argument made in court against General Electric, who were a part of the Phoebus cartel. To be clear, the case was about GE being a monopoly, not just about planned obsolescence. The lifespan of bulbs was one facet of this multifaceted case. The charges did not merely revolve around standard bulbs either. Two important arguments concerned flashlights and Christmas lights. It was in these cases that the court had access to internal documents and memos where General Electric's executives seemed to express concern that the short lifespan of the bulbs was decreasing sales relative to bulbs with longer lifespans. Twice, the memo stated that there would be around a 60% increase in lamp business if the life of the flashlights was reduced so that they would last for the length of only one battery, as opposed to 2 or 3. General Electric also recommended that a Christmas tree lamp be substituted for a nightlight lamp when the latter lasted 4 times longer. By the way, despite Christmas tree and nightlight sounding like different bulbs, these were similar and all looked like this. They are called C7 versus C7.5 bulbs. This is because the wattage of a C7 is 7 watts, while the wattage of a C7.5 is, well, if all of these different light bulb types are making your head spin, then there's no better way to sum up the result of the antitrust litigations than the conclusion from the case itself. Long quote incoming, but, lawyers. Although the government's contention that it has proved that General Electric could produce a 60-watt lamp giving 24 lumens of light has been rejected, these latter contentions with regard to flashlight bulbs and Christmas tree lamps illustrate an existing ability upon the part of General Electric to shorten the life of a lamp. At the same time, it should be borne in mind that the life of a lamp is inextricably related to the power of its light, in that the greater the strength of the light, the shorter will be the life of the lamp. It is realised that flashlight and Christmas tree lamps are lines of lesser importance in the incandescent electric lamp industry, although the overall production and profit in them is far from inconsequential. Despite assertions of good faith, sound business discretion, great technical research, and consideration for the interest of the consuming public, there was manifested in the two situations a paramount concern in what would afford the maximum return in profits to the manufacturer, and that General Electric had the power in the instance of the flashlight lamp to shorten the life of the lamp, and in the instance of the Christmas tree lamp at least, to promote a product with a short life for a specific use over one that had 4 times its life. However, the total proof leads to the conclusion that by virtue of General Electric's dominating position in the industry and relative lack of competition, it had the power to set the standard of efficiency of incandescent electric lamps for the entire industry, and in doing so, to determine what should be their length of life, and that this constitutes an attribute of monopoly. I therefore accuse the Technology Connections video of being subtly one-sided. Yes, there is a clear trade-off between the lifespan and brightness of the bulbs. Yes, it's possible that the world before the cartel was on the wrong side of this trade-off, with long-lasting but dim bulbs. However, as the US government concluded in the Antitrust case, General Electric had the power to decide where the trade-off would lie, plus the incentive to put it in a place that benefited them over consumers. They had both a motive and an opportunity. If you read the full case, presumably because you have literally nothing else to do, you'll see that TC is basically just arguing the side of the light bulb companies in this dispute. This isn't me accusing them of being in the pocket of Big Lightbulb, by the way. What I'm saying is that they don't show the opposing case well enough, and that they fail to mention that the conclusion of the litigation gave at least some credence to the idea that the bulb companies engaged in planned obsolescence. Returning to our diagram, this is how I would summarize the issue. The Centennial bulb is too dull, clearly, and maybe the pre-cartel light bulbs were too. But there's good reason to believe that members of the cartel like General Electric pushed us beyond the optimal point and down to the lower right-hand point or beyond. What the US versus General Electric establishes is at the very least that this was likely. I feel like TC could have been clearer about this. It's not just the USA either. Another similar piece of evidence comes from the German case. Osram was another light bulb manufacturer in the cartel. A well-circulated article called The Great Light Bulb Conspiracy, which I didn't see Technology Connections reference either, goes into more depth on the overwhelming evidence that profit was the priority in determining the lifespan of bulbs. Technology Connections is adamant that there was no avoiding the trade-off between lifespan and brightness.
Here's the rub. As I've hopefully demonstrated, the design of the tungsten filament incandescent light bulb was always an exercise in balancing lifespan with energy efficiency and quality of light output. And this is why using the Phoebus cartel as evidence of planned obsolescence rubs me the wrong way. By the time it was formed in 1925, scientists and engineers understood the lifespan efficiency trade-off. There are even equations for it. We had essentially perfected the tungsten filament lamp by the time the cartel was formed, and you simply cannot optimize for lifespan without making the light bulb worse at being a light bulb.
One way of framing this dispute is to ask, were the engineers optimizing for the best type of bulb, or were they optimizing for something else? An academic paper written in German by Markus Krajewski, the author of the Lightbulb Conspiracy article, notes that internal communications from the cartel showed that they were using a commercial rationale. Krajewski quotes a document circulated within Osram, warning for Microsoft Translation as I don't speak German in case you couldn't tell from my excellent pronunciations. From a commercial point of view, it is of very great importance to surpass the burning life of 1,000 hours as little as possible, as every surpassing of only 10 hours means a loss on the world contingent of plus minus 1%, or about 4 million units. Technically, it is possible to reach an average life of 1,000 hours to a few percentages exact when manufacturing very carefully. All of the Cartel engineers' efforts were directed into reducing the lifespan of existing incandescent bulbs. The lifespan of the bulbs had been gradually increasing as researchers pushed it in that direction, but with the Cartel, it went into reverse. The German academics also raised the question of how the efforts of industry researchers were oriented. What were their goals? Could we have had something like LED bulbs earlier? That's a genuine question. I emailed Krajewski for some clarification and he happily replied, but he hasn't gotten around to answering my bombardment of questions yet because he's busy. With any luck, I'll be able to have a conversation with him on this channel. For now though, let's stick with incandescent bulbs. Since the Cartel were oriented towards increasing sales with brighter but shorter-lived bulbs, it's natural to ask, was it plausible that these lighter bulbs could have been pushed onto consumers despite being against those consumers' best interests? My background is in behavioral economics, which is basically the intersection of psychology and economics. How people make decisions in the economic sphere is my wheelhouse, especially consumer decisions. Behavioral economics shows that there are plenty of quirks of human psychology readily exploited by companies to make money. This side of things was perhaps underexplored in my original video, so please indulge me as I pepper you with examples, some observational and others based on academic research. You may remember that not too long ago we had Black Friday. But, you know, Black Friday is basically a scam, right? Companies just say that things are on sale even though they're the same price as they were yesterday. Loads of people fall for it, even though the scam is kind of transparent and information about it is public.
The consumer group, which has found more than 90% of Black Friday deals were actually the same price or cheaper in the 6 months before Black Friday last year.
Even outside of Black Friday, sales and buy one get one free have been used in this way for decades and people still fall for them. The prices seem better when there's an offer, even though the offer continues indefinitely and makes the company sound money. Despite this, did I still get overexcited and buy 5 games on Steam on Black Friday, even though I literally study consumer biases? Yes. Another of Technology Connection's arguments is that longer-lasting, lower lifespan bulbs have been available for a long time, yet consumers haven't chosen them.
But that's the other thing. Those other technologies existed. They existed and were on the market, and anybody who valued efficiency and or longevity could decide to install such light fixtures. There was a sea of options by the 1950s, but the good old tungsten filament lamp remained the default because it had excellent light quality, was good enough, and most importantly, was cheap.
I don't think this cavalier belief in the consumer passes the smell test. Have you ever been sitting in a room reading or watching TV while day gradually fades to night outside? It's getting darker and darker, but you don't really notice because it happens so slowly, until someone walks into the room and goes, "Fucking hell, it's almost pitch black in here. What are you doing?" When they turn the lights on, you realise that you could barely see and your eyes were straining. Inertia is such a powerful force that it may even ignore pain signals from your body. What if we were doing a version of this as a society? Except instead of being accustomed to too little light, we were accustomed to too much. And instead of the latter half of one day, it was the latter half of the 20th century. Social norms and inertia are some of the most powerful features of human behaviour. We tend to go with the flow. If you walk into a room where everyone is completely quiet, you'll instantly go quiet yourself. And if you shout in this situation, then you are a sociopath. That's because the quietness is giving you information about how to behave in an environment where you clearly don't have the right information. If it's quiet, there's usually a reason, and you best stay quiet yourself while you find out what that reason is. By a similar token, it's not difficult to see that most people don't really know that much about light bulbs and energy usage. If they did, the Technology Connections video wouldn't have been such a revelation. A 2017 report by the Consumer Federation of America concluded, by their own admission, most of the public does not know much about different types of light bulbs. When light bulbs were a relatively new technology, it was feasible that people weren't really sure what level of light was best and would follow the standard set by what was available. As the Antitrust case notes, General Electric had the power to set the industry standard, as well as the cartel. Given that the Phoebus cartel directly enforced this standard for years with factory inspections and fines, it would have become a norm. Given our lack of understanding of light bulbs, plus our tendency to go with the flow and the imprints that large companies can make on our culture, it's possible that consumer trends could persist for a long time in the light bulb industry, even when those trends didn't make sense, and even when alternatives became readily available later on. Consumer energy usage and lighting have actually been the target of a lot of behavioural studies, largely owing to their importance for the environment. It is hoped that by getting people to be more conscious and make some fairly simple switches about the products they use or their energy plan, they can use less energy and save themselves money, as well as reducing their emissions. There are numerous successful interventions, like sending letters with smiley or frowny faces on them, depending on whether the consumer is using less or more energy than average, respectively. But the literature is clear that people's habits in this area are really difficult to dislodge, and even the more successful interventions have quite small impacts. As one report put it, a further barrier to purchasing technologically and economically efficient household appliances lies in the inertia of decision makers, or their aversion toward change, labelled the status quo bias above. Many decision makers shun the costs associated with change, which is why they do not change their electricity supplier or tariff, despite knowing better, forego renovations of their houses and apartments to make them more energy efficient, or do not buy new energy-using durables, which might be advantageous from an individual as well as from a societal point of view. Inertia also restrains people from replacing older, less energy-efficient appliances which are still functioning through new appliances with higher technological and economic efficiency. One study looked directly at incandescent bulbs versus the newer compact fluorescent light bulbs, or CFLs, which typically last 8 times longer and use 4 times less electricity. Despite the availability of CFLs and the fact that they benefit the consumer personally as well as the environment, uptake is low. In 2010, only 28% of sockets that could use CFLs actually had them. The authors ran an intervention where they communicated this information in person to consumers, and it had no effect on purchases. They ran another, more complex but hypothetical experiment and found that they could increase the consumer's willingness to pay for CFLs by $1.12, though whether this would actually translate into them buying more CFLs in practice is unclear. So there you have it, a null effect on actual purchases and a positive effect on hypothetical purchases. It's pretty clear how stubborn consumers are about their light bulbs. Hey, I wonder if anyone else agrees that consumer decisions in light bulb markets can be mistaken. This isn't a gotcha. In the rare event that you are watching Technology Connections, hello, I'm hoping to persuade you by using an example that resonates with you. I enjoyed the Christmas lights video and all of your videos, having discovered your channel through the light bulb one. I agree with this statement.
Some of you may like this. Even I like it at times. But for Christmas lights, it's just wrong, especially greens and blues. That is not a warm and fuzzy looking festive display. It's a tacky storefront with those chasing LED strips around the windows letting you know they have CBD oil.
Yeah, it is a clear example of going against what a lot of consumers are buying. There are alternatives like the True Tone, which are promoted in the video. Large companies like monopolies or cartels can release and market new products to make a huge imprint on our culture that people have to scramble to keep up with, which is acknowledged at the start.
Why exactly do we litter our homes with light bulbs around Christmas time? Don't know, but it's probably marketing. By golly, it worked on me though.
But wait a minute. Doesn't this contrast quite clearly with what Technology Connection says in his other video, where he's kind of unwilling to judge the choices of consumers?
But then, I hear you asking, why establish tests to make sure the bulbs didn't last too long? Assessing a fine to your members for making a light bulb that's just a little too good seems pretty iffy. Well, again, would it actually be good? That's up for debate, and it's kind of the whole point I'm making here.
Okay, honestly, I prefer the one on the left. I have noticed a growth in ambient or mood lighting as general dimness of bulbs has increased over the past few years or even the past decade. This is purely observational, and I couldn't find proper industry data on this since Google now just returns you a whole load of AI-generated scams, but I'd be happy to be corrected if that's not true. Anyway, I think that having less light is not necessarily worse, and again, the lamp on the left looks better to me. The brightness of the bulbs we use is driven by all sorts of things. Our level of income determines how much we can spend on our lighting setup. Variety and the growth of online shopping will have contributed to the rise of alternatives, with social media sites like Pinterest pushing trends in ambient lighting. The demands of the standard office environment, which favoured bright lights to keep dreary office workers awake during the 20th century, was surely a factor, though that setup is now dying thanks to COVID and working from home. Consumer awareness and information, especially about things like environmental issues, have changed over time and driven the demand for longer lifespan bulbs. In other words, it's not all the Phoebus cartel manipulating us all the way from the 1930s, but as the Antitrust case showed, they had an opportunity to set the brightness of a bulb high and the lifespan of a bulb low in a way that made them more money, yet led to more waste and ripped off consumers. Everything we know about consumer behaviour shows that consumers could easily have followed this trend for a long period of time, even if alternatives are readily available. A final part of the Technology Connections video I want to address is when he argues that the shorter-lived lifespans were cheaper overall for consumers because they used less energy.
But to produce the same amount of light, they needed more power and thus consumed more energy. This Washington Post article from 1981 points out that to produce the same amount of light as a 75-watt standard life bulb, you need to move up to a 100-watt long life bulb. Is it really worth a 33% increase in energy consumption just to avoid buying a 90-cent light bulb every 6 months? As a matter of fact, objectively, no. In 1981, the average cost for electricity in the US was 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour. Nice. Over the 2,500 hours of lifetime, those extra 25 watts would amount to 62.5 kilowatt hours of energy expenditure, which would cost you $4.31. So, by choosing the equally bright but longer lasting light bulb, you will spend $4.31 more on energy, but you won't even save $2 on light bulb.
The problem here is simple. There's an assumption that the consumers want the same level of light, so they have to increase the wattage when they have a longer lasting bulb. But if they stuck with the 75-watt bulb, they wouldn't spend anything extra on energy, but would still save money on light bulbs, at a cost of only 5% dimmer bulbs. Once again, I want to be clear, this video is not a slam dunk. It's a contribution to a conversation that I hope has been helpful. It's really, really difficult to know all the motives and possible outcomes surrounding the Phoebus cartel, and likely we never will. Hopefully, somebody will come along with some new information one of these days. What I'm suggesting is that there is sufficient reason to believe the conspiracy theory version of events because lightbulb companies had the power to set standards across the industry. The 1949 Antitrust case found in the case of Christmas and night light bulbs that General Electric, a cartel member, set these standards in favour of profit over consumer experience. Internal cartel and Osram documents investigated by Markus Krajewski showed that they were optimizing for money, not consumer experience. There is the possibility that the cartel discontinued research into unambiguously better alternatives given its priorities. The availability of alternative light bulbs later on isn't good evidence because consumers have a strong tendency to go with the flow, especially in the presence of a monopoly setting industry standards. Dimmer, longer-lasting bulbs were an option which the companies and consumers did not pursue, even though it could have led to lower costs and less waste at the expense of profits, i.e., no planned obsolescence. So that's all I've got on this follow-up, and thank you very much for watching. Bye!